The little girl's
Greta.
claws
Call
were
her
already
mommy.
extending when
Now.
Friedrich shoved her forward, his voice booming across the pack gathering. Say it, Greta. Call her mommy. Now. But 6-year-old Greta's eyes had already turned golden, her small body trembling with a rage no child should possess, and before anyone could stop her, she lunged at Adelheide's face with a feral snarl that silenced 300 wolves in an instant. If you've ever felt like someone tried to force you into a role you never asked for, smash that like button right now and tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug, because what happened next will make your blood run cold. The attack lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds that destroyed a pack, exposed a conspiracy, and revealed why you should never ever force a wolf pup to accept a replacement for the mother who died protecting her. Greta's claws caught Adelheid across the cheek, for perfect lines of crimson appearing before anyone processed what was happening. The Omega nannies screamed. The enforcers lunged forward. And Friedrich, Alpha of the Schwarzwald pack, stood frozen as his daughter's shift completed mid-air, her small wolf form twisting with unnatural speed as she went for Adelheide's throat. But here's what nobody knew. Here's the secret that was about to unravel everything Friedrich had built in the 6 months since his mate Brunhild died. Greta wasn't just rejecting Adelheid because she missed her mother. She was rejecting Adelheid because somewhere deep in her wolf's instinct, buried in the ancestral memory that made their kind superior to humans, she knew the truth. She knew what Adelheid had done. Let me take you back. Let me show you how a love story became a murder, how ambition turned into obsession, and how a child's wolf saw what 300 adults refused to see. 8 months before that public attack, Brunhild was the most beloved Luna the Schwarzwald pack had ever known. She wasn't the strongest fighter, wasn't from the most prestigious bloodline, wasn't even particularly beautiful by wolf standards. But she had something that couldn't be trained or inherited. She had a gift for making people feel seen. Every Omega knew her by name. Every pup received a gift on their birthday, handmade by Brunhild herself. She remembered anniversaries, attended every ceremony, mediated disputes with a wisdom that made even the most stubborn wolves reconsider their positions. And she loved Friedrich with an intensity that bordered on worship. They weren't fated mates. The bond wasn't written in the stars or blessed by the moon goddess with that silver cord that made separation physically painful. They were chosen mates, which some wolves considered lesser, but anyone who saw them together knew the truth. Choice made it stronger. Every day they chose each other was another brick in a foundation that seemed unshakable. Greta was their miracle. Brunhild had suffered 3 miscarriages before her, each loss taking a piece of her soul, each failure making Friedrich love her more fiercely, not less. When Greta was finally born, healthy and howling with the strong lungs of a future alpha, the entire pack celebrated for 3 days straight. Brunhild carried that baby everywhere, sang to her in the old tongue, taught her to feel the moon's pull before she could even walk. That's when Adelheid appeared. She came from the Eisenberg pack in the north, a distant cousin seeking asylum after her own pack was decimated by hunters. She arrived with nothing but a torn dress and a story of survival that made the pack elders weep. Friedrich, being the kind of alpha who never turned away refugees, welcomed her immediately. Brunhild, being the kind of Luna who saw the broken and wanted to fix them, took Adelheid under her wing personally. For 3 months everything seemed perfect. Adelheid was grateful, helpful, always volunteering for the hardest tasks. She worked in the pack kitchens, helped with the pup education program, never asked for special treatment despite being well-educated and clearly from a higher-ranking family than she let on. Brunhild praised her constantly. She even told Friedrich one night, while they lay in bed with Greta sleeping between them, that she thought Adelheid might be a gift from the moon goddess, a sign that their pack was blessed. Friedrich should have noticed when Adelheid started watching him differently. Should have seen how her eyes lingered when he trained with the enforcers, how she always managed to be in his path when he crossed the pack grounds, how her scent changed subtly when he entered a room. But he was an alpha focused on his pack's prosperity, a father besotted with his daughter, a mate secure in his bond. He didn't notice because he had no reason to suspect. Brunhild noticed. Brunhild saw everything. She mentioned it once, carefully, while folding laundry in their private quarters. Adelheid seems very attentive to you lately. Friedrich had laughed, kissed her forehead, told her she was imagining things. She's just grateful, he said. She's found a home after losing everything. Of course she's devoted to her Alpha. Brunhild didn't push. That was her way. She trusted Friedrich completely, and more than that, she trusted in the bond they'd built. No she-wolf could compete with 6 years of choosing each other, with the daughter they'd created, with a life they'd woven together thread by careful thread. She was wrong. She was catastrophically, fatally wrong. Because Adelheid wasn't just infatuated with Friedrich. She was obsessed with becoming Luna, with possessing the life Brunhild had built, with erasing her predecessor and stepping into her place like sliding into a warm coat on a winter night. The first poisoning happened at the spring equinox celebration. Brunhild collapsed during the feast, her skin going gray, her breathing shallow. The pack doctor diagnosed it as a severe allergic reaction to something in the food, possibly contaminated mushrooms. She recovered after 2 days of rest, weak but alive. Friedrich tripled the guards, investigated the kitchens, found nothing conclusive. Adelheid was the most attentive visitor, bringing broths and teas, sitting with Brunhild for hours, reading to her from the old pack histories. The second poisoning came 6 weeks later, more severe. Brunhild's wolf retreated so deep inside her that her eyes stayed human for 3 days straight, a sign of critical weakness that terrified everyone who understood wolf physiology. This time the pack doctor found traces of wolfsbane in her system, not enough to kill but enough to cripple her wolf. Friedrich lost his mind. He interrogated everyone who had access to Brunhild's food, her quarters, her personal items. He found nothing. No one suspected Adelheid. How could they? She was the refugee, the victim, the grateful Omega who'd found sanctuary. She was Brunhild's personal project, her friend, her protégé. She had no motive that anyone could see and no opportunity that wasn't shared by dozens of other pack members. But Greta knew. Even at 5 years old, Greta's wolf knew. Children's wolves are closer to the surface, more instinctual, less corrupted by human rationality. Greta started having nightmares after the second poisoning, dreams of a shadow with Adelheid's scent standing over her mother with dripping claws. She told Brunhild, in the way children do, mixing truth with imagination. "The nice lady smells wrong, Mama. Her wolf is pretending." Brunhild soothed her, dismissed it as anxiety from seeing her mother sick. She even asked Adelheid to spend more time with Greta, thinking that familiarity would ease the child's fear. It was the worst decision she ever made. The third poisoning killed her. It happened on a night when Friedrich was away at a Alpha Summit 3 territories over, when the pack's guard was relaxed because they were in their own stronghold, protected by wards and tradition and the simple arrogance of wolves who'd never been infiltrated. Brunhild drank her evening tea, prepared by Adelheid as it had been for the past 2 weeks, while the regular kitchen staff dealt with a stomach virus that had suspiciously affected everyone except Adelheid. Greta found her mother an hour later, convulsing on the bedroom floor, foam at her lips, her wolf trying desperately to burn out the poison but failing, the toxin too strong and too perfectly calibrated for her system. The little girl screamed for help, her own wolf surging forward in panic, and the pack descended in chaos. By the time Friedrich arrived, breaking every speed limit and traffic law between the summit and home, Brunhild was gone. The pack doctor said it was a concentrated dose of refined wolfsbane mixed with nightshade and something else, something he couldn't identify, something that suggested sophistication and premeditation. This wasn't an accident. This was an assassination. The pack mourned for 30 days, as tradition demanded. Friedrich was a ghost of himself, barely eating, barely speaking, spending hours in Greta's room holding her while she cried for her mama. The investigation continued but yielded nothing. The kitchen had been cleaned, the tea service washed, the supply chains examined and found secure. Whoever did this had planned perfectly. Adelheid played her role flawlessly. She wept at the funeral, gave a eulogy that made even the hardest warriors cry, volunteered to help with Greta when Friedrich couldn't function. She never overstepped, never pushed, just made herself indispensable in the quiet way that people find comforting during grief. 3 months after Brunhild's death, Friedrich started noticing Adelheid differently. How could he not? She was there every morning with fresh coffee, every evening with a meal he didn't have to think about, every moment he started to drown with a hand to pull him back. She listened when he talked about Brunhild, never jealous, always understanding. She was patient with Greta even when the child was impossible, grieving and angry and lashing out at everyone. 4 months after Brunhild's death, Friedrich kissed Adelheid. He didn't mean to. It happened late one night after Greta finally fell asleep following a particularly bad tantrum. Adelheid had stayed to help, and when she turned to leave, he caught her hand and just pulled her close, kissed her like a drowning man gasping for air, felt something in his chest unclench for the first time since Brunhild died. Adelheid kissed him back like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. 'Cause she had. She'd been planning it for 8 months, executing it for 6, and now she was finally claiming her prize. 5 months after Brunhild's death, Friedrich announced Adelheid as his chosen mate and future Luna. The pack was shocked but not surprised. Everyone had seen them growing closer, seen how Adelheid had helped him survive his grief, seen how good she was with Greta despite the child's obvious hostility. The elders approved. Pack accepted. Only Greta raged, screaming that Adelheid wasn't her mother, would never be her mother, that her real mama was coming back and she hated the pretender. Friedrich told himself it was grief. He told himself Greta would adjust, that children were resilient, that love would eventually win over trauma. He increased Adelheid's time with Greta, insisted they do activities together, suggested Greta call her something affectionate since Adelheid was so formal. Adelheid suggested mommy, just like Brunhild, just slipping into the dead Luna's place completely. Friedrich, broken and desperate and not thinking clearly, agreed. He thought it would help. He thought it would create normalcy. He thought he was helping his daughter heal. 6 months after Brunhild's death, Friedrich organized a pack gathering to formally recognize Adelheid as Luna. Every wolf from every corner of the territory was required to attend, to witness, to pledge loyalty to their new first female. It was tradition, necessary for the pack bonds to recognize the change in hierarchy. Greta was dressed in a white ceremony gown, her hair braided with silver ribbons, looking like a tiny angel. Friedrich held her hand as they walked onto the raised platform where Adelheid waited in full Luna regalia, Brunhild's ceremonial cloak on her shoulders, Brunhild's crown in her hair, Brunhild's position now hers by right of the Alpha's choice. The pack assembled in perfect silence, 300 wolves watching their leader claim his new mate. The ritual was simple. The Alpha presents his chosen Luna. His heir acknowledges her. The pack howls their acceptance. Friedrich had explained it to Greta a dozen times, made her practice the words, bribed her with promises of her favorite dessert and extra playtime. But when the moment came, when Friedrich squeezed Greta's hand and whispered, "Now, darling, say it like we practiced," the little girl looked up at Adelheid with those gold-flecked brown eyes and saw something that made her wolf explode to the surface. She saw her mother's murderer. She saw the shadow from her nightmares. She saw the pretender wearing her mama's crown and smiling with satisfaction at having taken everything that mattered. Friedrich's voice boomed across the assembly. "Say it, Greta. Call her mommy. Now." Greta's shift started before the last word left his mouth. Her small body convulsed, bones cracking and reforming with the speed of pure instinct, and she launched herself at Adelheid's face with claws extended and fangs bared. The attack was so fast, so unexpected, so absolutely feral that even the experienced warriors didn't react in time. Adelheid screamed as Greta's claws raked across her cheek, for perfect lines that would scar even with advanced wolf healing. The child's small wolf form, barely larger than a natural wolf cub, twisted mid-air with impossible agility, going for the throat like she'd been trained by ancient warriors instead of being a 6-year-old who'd barely learned to shift without help. Friedrich caught Greta mid-lunge, his own alpha reflexes finally kicking in, pulling his daughter back as she snarled and snapped and fought him with a strength that shouldn't have existed in a pup. His enforcer surrounded them immediately, forming a barrier between the child and Adelheid, who stood with blood dripping down her face and genuine terror in her eyes. The pack was in chaos. Wolves were shouting, children crying, the elders trying to restore order. But Friedrich only had eyes for his daughter, who was still in her wolf form, still fighting his hold, her small jaws snapping toward Adelheid again and again as a high-pitched keening sound emerged from her throat. That sound. That specific sound. It was the mourning cry of a wolf who'd lost its mother. But more than that, it was the war cry of a wolf who'd identified its mother's killer. 3 wolves in the crowd knew that sound. 3 elderly females who'd lived long enough to remember the old ways, the old instincts, the old truths that modern wolves had forgotten. One of them, a grandmother named Hildegard who'd served as pack historian for 40 years, pushed through the crowd with her eyes wide. "Alpha!" Her voice cut through the chaos. "Alpha, stop. The child is accusing." Friedrich looked at her like she was insane. "Accusing? She's traumatized, she's acting out, she's accusing that woman of murder." Hildegard's voice rang across the assembly, and suddenly the chaos shifted into deadly silence. "It's the old way, Alpha. Before we had investigations and evidence, we had the instinct. A pup's wolf knows its mother's killer. It's in their blood, in their bond. Your daughter isn't misbehaving. She's executing justice." Adelheid went pale. Actually pale. Her skin losing color in a way that wolves didn't do unless they were terrified. "That's ridiculous," she said, but her voice shook. "The child is upset, she's been difficult since I arrived. Everyone knows she refuses to accept me. Because she smells her mother's death on you." Another elderly voice. This one belonging to Gertrude, a former enforcer who'd retired after losing a leg in a challenge. "I thought I was imagining it, the wrongness in your scent. I'm old, my nose isn't what it was. But the pup smells it clearly." Friedrich's world was tilting. "This is insane." Adelheid was Brunhild's friend, she had no reason, no opportunity. She had both. The third elder, Lieselot, stepped forward with a walking stick and eyes that had seen 70 winters. "I've been researching since the announcement, Alpha. Forgive my suspicion, but something felt wrong about this new Luna from the moment she arrived. Adelheid of Eisenberg doesn't exist. The Eisenberg pack was decimated, yes, but I contacted their survivors. No one named Adelheid was ever part of their pack." The assembly's silence had weight now, pressure, the collective attention of 300 predators focusing on one woman. Adelheid's eyes darted, looking for escape routes, but enforcers had unconsciously moved to block them, their own instincts finally catching up. "Furthermore," Lieselot continued, "I found records of a she-wolf matching Adelheid's description who was exiled from the Fichtelberg pack 7 years ago for attempting to poison their Luna. She went by the name Kunigun then. Different name, same pattern. She infiltrates, befriends, murders, and replaces." Friedrich's hands loosened on Greta, and the little wolf immediately shifted back to human form, naked and shaking but calm now. Her eyes fixed on Adelheid with absolute certainty. "She smells like the shadows in my dreams," Greta said in her small child's voice. "She smells like what killed Mama." Adelheid ran. It was the worst possible move, an admission of guilt through action, but panic overrode strategy. She shifted mid-run, her wolf form larger than expected, suggesting she'd been hiding her true rank. She bolted for the forest edge, moving with the speed of a well-trained warrior, not a grateful refugee. She made it maybe 30 yards before Friedrich's wolf took her down. The Alpha shifted faster than thought, his massive black form covering the distance in 3 bounds, and when he hit Adelheid it was with the full force of a leader who just realized he'd been sleeping with his mate's murderer. They fought. Really fought. Not the dominant scuffles of pack hierarchy but a death match, all claws and fangs and absolute murder. Adelheid was good, better than she'd pretended, her moves suggesting elite training. But Friedrich was an alpha in the grip of grief and rage and betrayal, and those emotions made him unstoppable. It lasted 5 minutes. When it ended, Adelheid was back in human form, her throat in Friedrich's jaws, her life hanging by his mercy. He dragged her back to the assembly platform and forced her to shift back, standing over her bloodied form with death in his eyes. "Confess," he growled, his voice barely human. "Confess or I end you now." Adelheid laughed. Actually laughed, blood bubbling from her lips. "Why not? I'm dead anyway." She looked at the assembled pack with defiance. "Yes, I killed Brunhild. Yes, I planned it from the moment I saw Friedrich and wanted what she had. She was weak, undeserving of an alpha like him. I would have been a better Luna. I would have made this pack stronger." "You poisoned her 3 times, Friedrich said, each word a blade. "The last dose was enough to kill 5 wolves. Why? Because she wouldn't die." Adelheid's composure cracked. "The first 2 times, her wolf was stronger than I calculated. I had to triple the dose, mix in compounds I'd never used before. She fought so hard to stay alive, to stay with you and that wretched child. I hated her for it. Hated how perfect everyone thought she was, how beloved, how irreplaceable." He spat blood. "But I replaced her anyway. I won. You won nothing." Hildegard's voice was cold. "The child knew. The bond knew. You were a pretender wearing a dead wolf's crown, and even the pup could see the truth." Friedrich looked at Greta, still standing naked and small on the platform, and something in him shattered. His daughter had been trying to tell him for months, through nightmares and tantrums and that desperate, repeated insistence that Adelheid was wrong, was dangerous, was not mama. And he'd dismissed it as grief. He'd forced his child to spend time with her mother's killer. He'd told her to call that monster Mommy. "I'm sorry," he whispered, shifting back to human form, walking to Greta on shaking legs. "I'm so sorry, little one." Greta stared at him with eyes too old for 6 years. "I told you she smelled wrong. I know. I should have listened. I should have trusted you." Friedrich pulled his daughter close, feeling her small body tremble. "I should have trusted your wolf." The pack demanded justice. Old justice, the kind that came before lawyers and trials and modern sensibilities. They wanted blood for blood, a life for a life, the ancient law that kept wolf packs pure. Friedrich, still holding Greta, looked at Adelheid and felt nothing but emptiness. "You wanted to be Luna," he said quietly. "You wanted the pack to see you, to honor you, to remember you." He turned to his enforcers. "Strip her of her wolf." Pack gasped. It was the worst punishment possible, worse than death, a severing of the human from their animal spirit that left them empty and broken. It was reserved for the worst crimes, for betrayals so deep that death would be mercy. "No," Adelheid begged, her bravado finally cracking. "No, please, just kill me, don't take my wolf, please." But the pack elders were already chanting, the old words in the old language, and the pack doctor was preparing the ritual blade. Took an hour. Adelheid screamed the entire time. When it was done, she was just human, just a broken woman with nothing left but her memories of what she'd been. "Now," Friedrich said, his voice empty, "you'll live. You'll live as a human, weak and mortal and ordinary. And you'll remember every day what you lost. You'll remember that you murdered a beloved Luna, traumatized a child, and gained nothing. You'll remember that wolves are not prizes to be won or positions to be stolen. You'll remember that Brunhild died loved by her pack, her mate, and her daughter, while you'll die forgotten and despised." Adelheid was exiled that night, cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back, forbidden from seeking sanctuary with any pack. The last anyone saw of her, she was walking into the human world with dead eyes and hunched shoulders, a predator stripped of everything that made her powerful. The pack spent the next 3 months healing. Friedrich stepped down temporarily, letting his beta Wolfram lead while he focused on Greta. The child needed therapy, both human and wolf, needed time to process that her instincts were right, that adults had failed her, that her mother was never coming back but her father was still here and finally listening. They visited Brunhild's grave every morning. Friedrich told Greta stories about her mother, real stories with flaws and jokes and moments of imperfection that made Brunhild human rather than saintly. He apologized every day for not believing her, for forcing the relationship with Adelheid, for being so broken by grief that he'd made catastrophic decisions. Greta forgave him the way children do, in pieces and moments. She had nightmares for months, would wake up screaming about shadows and poison and the smell of wrongness. But slowly, with help and time and her father's unwavering presence, she began to heal. The pack never forgot. They erected a memorial to Brunhild in the center of the pack grounds, a statue of her holding a pup, with an inscription that read, "Beloved Luna, taken by treachery, avenged by her daughter's truth." They instituted new laws about investigating deaths, about listening to children's instincts, about never dismissing the warnings of those whose wolves were closest to the surface. And they told the story. Over and over, in every ceremony and gathering, they told the story of how a 6-year-old pup saw what 300 wolves missed, how instinct triumphed over deception, how truth emerged through the most unlikely source. Friedrich never took another mate. He raised Greta alone with the help of the pack, and taught her that her wolf's instincts were a gift to be honored, not a quirk to be dismissed. He trained her personally, helped her understand the power of that ancient knowledge that lived in their bones and blood. Greta grew up strong. She carried her mother's memory with pride and her own trauma with dignity. She became known throughout the wolf territories as the pup who knew, a living reminder that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. On Greta's 16th birthday, Friedrich took her back to the memorial. "Your mother would be so proud," he said, looking at the statue. "You saved the pack, little one. You saved me." Greta touched the stone gently. "I just knew she smelled wrong. My wolf knew." "That's the lesson," Friedrich said. "Always trust your wolf. Always trust your instincts. They're older than logic, deeper than thought. They're the part of us that survived when survival was impossible." Years later, when Greta became beta of the pack and then eventually alpha after her father's retirement, she instituted a new tradition. Every pup, on their 6th birthday, received training in trusting their instincts. They learned the story of Brunhild and Adelheid, learned that rank and age didn't always mean wisdom, learned that sometimes a child's wolf saw clearer than an elder's reason. The story spread beyond the Schwarzwald pack. It became a teaching tale, a warning, a testament to the power of instinct and the danger of dismissing those who seemed powerless. Packs across the territories told it, adapted it, made it their own. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, Greta would remember that day on the platform. The moment when her wolf surged forward, when every instinct screamed danger, when she looked at Adelheid wearing her mother's crown and knew with absolute certainty that justice demanded action. She'd asked her father once, years later, if he regretted not killing Adelheid outright. Friedrich had considered the question seriously before answering. "Death would have been easier," he said. "But making her live without her wolf, making her spend every day knowing what she lost and why she lost it, that was justice. Your mother believed in rehabilitation, in second chances, in mercy. But she also believed that actions have consequences. Adelheid chose murder. She lives with that choice now, every single day, as a human among humans, never again to feel the moon's pull or hear the pack's song." "Good," Greta had said simply. And Friedrich had agreed. The attack that day, the one that silenced 300 wolves and changed the course of the Schwarzwald pack forever, lasted only 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds contained a truth that resonated through generations. Trust the wolf, trust the instinct, trust the knowing that lives in blood and bone and ancient memory. Because sometimes a child sees what adults refuse to see. Sometimes innocence perceives evil more clearly than experience. Sometimes the smallest warrior carries the sharpest truth. Adelheid wanted to be Luna. She wanted the crown, the status, the mate, the life. She murdered for it, schemed for it, manipulated her way into position with ruthless precision. She achieved her goal, stood on that platform wearing her victim's regalia, moments away from receiving the pack's loyalty. And she was destroyed by the one soul she'd underestimated, a grieving 6-year-old who trusted her wolf more than the adults trusted their reason. Friedrich learned humility that day. He learned that being alpha didn't mean always being right, That wisdom sometimes came in small packages with gold-flecked eyes, that listening was more important than commanding. He spent the rest of his leadership making sure every voice in his pack was heard, especially the youngest, especially the ones everyone else dismissed. The pack learned vigilance. They learned that evil could wear a friendly face, that predators came in unexpected forms, that trust without verification was dangerous. They learned to honor children's fears and respect the instincts that adults often suppressed in the name of civilization. And Greta learned that her voice mattered, that her wolf's wisdom was valuable, that even when everyone told her she was wrong, when her own father dismissed her fears, when the entire pack seemed blind to the danger, she could trust herself. That lesson shaped her into a leader who valued every pack member's input, who never dismissed a concern as trivial, who understood that strength sometimes meant listening rather than commanding. The story of that day became legend. Traveling wolves brought it to distant packs. Human writers who knew about wolf culture adapted it into cautionary tales. Young wolves heard it and learned to trust their instincts. Parents told it to children who feared their own perceptions were wrong. And sometimes, on the night of the full moon, when the Schwarzwald pack gathered to honor their fallen Luna, they would see a small figure standing before Brunhild's memorial. Greta, no longer small but never forgetting, paying respects to the mother whose death taught her the value of truth and the cost of silence. Friedrich would join her, standing beside his daughter in comfortable silence, both of them remembering the day when everything changed. The day a pup's wolf saw clearly, acted decisively, and saved her pack from a predator who wore the mask of friend and lover. "I still smell her sometimes," Greta admitted once, years after the incident. "In dreams, in shadows. The wrongness of her. That's your wolf keeping you safe," Friedrich said. "Never forget that smell. Never ignore that warning. Saved your life. Saved mine. It saved our pack." Greta nodded, touching the memorial stone. Mama would have figured it out eventually. She was already suspicious. "Maybe," Friedrich agreed. But Adelheid knew that, which is why she accelerated her timeline. She knew Brunhild was too smart, too intuitive, too beloved to deceive forever. So she killed her before she could act on her suspicions. "She underestimated both of you," Greta said. "Mama in life and me in death." "She underestimated love," Friedrich corrected. "She thought taking Brunhild's place meant taking her role. But love isn't a position. It's not something you can steal or manipulate your way into. Your mother earned every bit of devotion this pack gave her, through years of service and care and genuine connection. Adelheid thought she could shortcut that process. She learned the truth too late." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and earth and the distant song of wolves running through their territory. Greta closed her eyes, letting her wolf rise close to the surface, feeling the ancient knowledge that had saved her life when she was just a pup. "Tell me again," she said suddenly. "The part where you realized I was right." Friedrich smiled sadly. "When Hildegard said you were accusing, and everything suddenly made sense. Your nightmares, your resistance, your absolute refusal to accept Adelheid despite every adult telling you to try harder. In that moment, I understood that I'd been forcing my grieving daughter to bond with her mother's murderer. I still have nightmares about what could have happened if you hadn't acted when you did. I couldn't let her wear Mama's crown," Greta said simply. "My wolf wouldn't allow it. The moment Papa told me to call her Mommy, something in me just snapped. All the instinct, all the knowing, all the rage of a pup whose mother was stolen, it all came together. I wasn't thinking. I was just acting. Pure instinct," Friedrich agreed. "The kind that civilized wolves try to suppress. Thank the moon goddess you were too young to have learned that suppression yet." They stood in silence as the moon rose higher, casting silver light across the memorial. Other wolves began arriving for the monthly remembrance, bringing flowers and small gifts, sharing stories about Brunhild that kept her memory alive. A young mother approached with her own pup, maybe 5 years old, who looked at Greta with wide eyes. "Are you really the pup who knew?" the child asked. Greta knelt down to the child's level, smiling gently. "I am. Do you want to know the secret?" The pup nodded eagerly. Always trust your wolf, Greta said. Even when adults tell you you're wrong. Even when everyone else seems blind to what you see. Your wolf knows things your human mind hasn't learned yet. Honor that knowledge. It might save your life someday. The pup's mother thanked Greta quietly, understanding the weight of that lesson. They moved on to the memorial, adding their flowers to the growing pile. Friedrich watched his daughter with pride. She'd taken her trauma and turned it into wisdom, her pain into purpose. She taught every young wolf in the pack to value their instincts, to speak up when something felt wrong, to never dismiss their wolf's warnings in favor of social pressure. She would be proud of you, he said again, because it was true and because it needed to be said. Greta stood, looking at her mother's stone face, frozen forever in protective love. I know. And I'm proud of you too, Papa. You listened eventually. You believed me. You acted. Not every alpha would have accepted being wrong in front of the entire pack. It was the easiest decision I ever made, Friedrich said. The moment I understood what you were telling me, there was no question. Justice for Brunhild. Safety for you. Truth for the pack. Everything else was just details. They stood together until the ceremony ended, until the last wolf paid their respects and departed. Then they walked back to the pack house together, father and daughter, Alpha and Beta, two wolves who'd learned the hardest way that love required trust, that trust required listening, and that sometimes the most important lessons came from the smallest teachers. The story continues, passed down through generations, refined by countless tellings but always holding the same core truth. A 6-year-old pup saw what 300 wolves missed. She trusted her instinct over social pressure. She acted when action was needed. And because of her courage, because of that 3-second attack that changed everything, an entire pack learned to listen to the voices they'd been trained to dismiss. Years turned into decades. Greta's own daughter, named Brunhild after the grandmother she never met, grew up hearing the story. Young Brunhild would ask her mother to tell it again and again, fascinated by the idea that children could see truths that adults missed. She learned early to trust her wolf, to speak up when something felt wrong, to never let politeness or social hierarchy silence her instincts. And when young Brunhild was 7 years old, she used that lesson to identify a spy in their pack, a wolf who'd been passing information to rivals for months. The adults had suspected nothing. But Brunhild noticed how the wolf's scent changed when certain topics were discussed, how his eyes shifted away during strategy meetings, how he always volunteered to run errands that took him near the border at suspicious times. She told her mother. Greta listened immediately, investigated quietly, and discovered the betrayal before it could cause serious damage. The spy was exiled, the security breach sealed, and the pack remained strong. You see, Greta told her daughter after the incident, your grandmother's legacy isn't just a story. It's a living principle. Trust your wolf. Always. Friedrich lived to see his great-grandchildren, a rare blessing for wolves. On his deathbed, surrounded by 4 generations of his bloodline, he asked Greta to tell the story one more time. She did, her voice steady despite her tears, recounting every detail of that day when she was 6 years old and her wolf knew what her father refused to see. That was my greatest failure and my greatest lesson, Friedrich said when she finished, his voice weak but clear. I was so lost in grief that I couldn't see the predator standing right in front of me. I forced my child to accept her mother's killer. I almost gave that murderer everything she wanted. He looked around at his descendants. Never be so arrogant that you dismiss instinct in favor of logic. Never be so broken that you stop listening to those who love you. And never ever underestimate the wisdom of a wolf who's still close enough to their animal to hear its voice clearly. He died that night peacefully with Greta holding his hand. The pack mourned their former alpha with all the ceremony and respect his decades of leadership deserved. But the story they told most often at his memorial wasn't about his victories in battle or his shrewd political alliances. It was about the day he admitted he was wrong, the day he chose his daughter's truth over his own pride, the day he let a 6-year-old child teach him the most important lesson of his life. The Schwarzwald pack prospered under Greta's leadership. She ruled for 30 years before passing the mantle to her own daughter, establishing a tradition of alphas who valued instinct as much as strategy, who listened as much as they commanded, who never forgot that wisdom could come from unexpected sources. And every year, on the anniversary of Brunhild's death, the pack gathered at her memorial. They told the story of the Luna who was beloved, the predator who wore friendship as a mask, and the pup whose wolf saw clearly when 300 adults were blind. Visitors from other packs would come to hear it, to learn from it, to carry it back to their own territories. The story evolved with each telling, gaining details and losing others, but the core remained constant. Trust your wolf, trust your instincts, trust that the ancient knowledge in your blood sometimes knows better than the civilized thoughts in your head. Adelheide's fate became a footnote, a cautionary tale whispered among wolves who grew too ambitious. Some said she died alone in a human city, never adjusting to life without her wolf. Others claimed she went mad, haunted by what she'd lost. A few reported seeing a broken woman who wandered from town to town, always moving, never settling, as if running from ghosts that only she could see. The truth was simpler and sadder. Adelheid lived for 20 more years after her exile, working menial jobs in human society, keeping her head down, trying to forget what she'd been. She never recovered from losing her wolf. The emptiness consumed her slowly, turning her bitter and hollow. She died in a charity hospital, alone, unmourned. Her body cremated by the state because no one claimed it. No wolf mourned her passing. Her name became synonymous with betrayal, with the kind of ambition that destroys rather than builds. Parents used her as a warning. Don't be like Adelheid. Don't let desire make you monstrous. Don't think you can take what should be earned. But Brunhild's name became a blessing. May you be as wise as Brunhild, wolves would say. May you be as beloved as Brunhild was. Her memory lived on not just in the Schwarzwald pack but across the territories, a reminder that true leadership came from genuine connection, that love couldn't be manufactured or stolen, that the bonds built through years of service and care were worth more than any crown. And Greta's name became a symbol. The pup who knew. A reminder that age and size didn't determine the value of truth, that children's instincts deserved respect, that sometimes the smallest voice carried the most important message. The 3-second attack that started everything became frozen in pack history as a perfect moment of instinct overriding everything else. Friedrich's command to call Adelheid mommy. Greta's wolf surging forward in absolute rejection. The claws extending, the shift happening faster than thought, the lunge that exposed a murderer and saved a pack. 3 seconds that contained a lifetime of lessons. 3 seconds that proved instinct was valuable, that children knew things adults forgot, that love couldn't be forced or faked or stolen. 3 seconds that changed how an entire pack understood trust, loyalty, and the wisdom of listening to voices that society trained them to dismiss. Decades later, when Greta was old and gray and ready to join her mother and father, she returned to the memorial one last time. Her joints ached, her wolf was tired, but her mind was clear. She touched the stone face of the mother she barely remembered, the Luna who'd loved her so fiercely that even death couldn't break their bond. I kept my promise, Mama, Greta whispered. I trusted my wolf. I spoke the truth. I made sure no one ever dismissed a pup's instinct again. She smiled, tears tracking down her weathered face. Papa learned. The pack learned. And now pups across every territory know that their wolves are wise, that their voices matter, that they should never stay silent when something feels wrong. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and earth and the distant howl of wolves running free. Greta felt her mother's presence, warm and loving, the bond that death had bent but never broken. She felt her father's pride, his gratitude, his love that had survived his worst mistake and emerged stronger. I'll see you soon, Greta said softly. Both of you. And I'll tell you everything that happened after. How your story changed the world. How that 3-second attack became the foundation of a new way of thinking. How the pup who knew became the alpha who listened. She died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her pack. They mourned her with all the ceremony and love she deserved, celebrating a life lived in service, in truth, in honor of the mother she'd avenged and the father she'd taught humility. At her memorial, they told the story again. The complete story now, from Brunhild's murder to Greta's leadership to the legacy that spread across every wolf territory. They told it to the young pups who needed to hear that their instincts mattered. They told it to the adults who needed reminding that wisdom came in unexpected forms. They told it to the visitors who carried it home to their own packs, spreading the lesson further. And in every telling, that moment remained the centerpiece. A 6-year-old girl, ordered by her alpha father to call her mother's murderer mommy, whose wolf said no with claws and fangs and absolute certainty. That moment when instinct overrode authority, when truth demanded action, when a child's clarity cut through 300 adults' blindness. That moment that proved what the old wolves always knew but modern packs had forgotten. The wolf knows. The wolf remembers. The wolf sees clearly when human eyes are clouded by emotion or social pressure or wishful thinking. And a pup's wolf, still close to the surface, still unfiltered by civilization's demands, sometimes sees most clearly of all. The story never ends, not really. It lives on in every pack that values instinct over hierarchy, in every parent who listens when their child says something feels wrong, in every leader who remembers that wisdom isn't determined by age or rank. It lives on in the countless pups who heard about Greta and learned that their voice mattered. Their wolf was wise. Their instincts were valuable. It lives on in the memorial that still stands in the Schwarzwald Pack Center, where Brunhild holds her pup in eternal stone, where wolves still bring flowers and gifts and stories, where the inscription reminds everyone who passes. Beloved Luna, taken by treachery, avenged by her daughter's truth. Truth spoken by a 6-year-old who trusted her wolf more than she trusted 300 adults. Truth expressed through claws and fangs and 3 seconds of perfect instinctive action. Truth that exposed a murderer, saved an alpha from his blindness, and taught an entire pack that sometimes the smallest warriors carry the sharpest clarity. That's the power of trusting your wolf. That's the value of listening to instinct. That's the lesson that a grieving child taught to a broken father and a deceived pack. When your wolf says no, when every instinct screams danger, when the ancient knowledge in your blood contradicts what your human mind wants to believe, trust the wolf. Always trust the wolf. Because Adelheid was clever. She was patient. She planned perfectly, executed flawlessly, and achieved her goal. She stood on that platform wearing a murdered Luna's crown, seconds away from claiming everything she'd schemed for. She'd fooled an entire pack, seduced a grieving alpha, and positioned herself to rule for decades. But she couldn't fool a 6-year-old's wolf. Couldn't mask her scent from a pup whose bond with her mother ran deeper than death. Couldn't hide the wrongness that Greta's instincts recognized even when her human mind couldn't articulate why. And that was her downfall. Not the investigation she'd evaded. Not the evidence she'd eliminated. Not the suspicions she'd deflected. A child's wolf, acting on pure instinct, seeing clearly what 300 civilized wolves had rationalized away. 3 seconds. 4 claw marks across a murderer's face. 1 small wolf's lunge for justice. And everything changed. That's the story. That's the lesson. That's the legacy of the Luna who died beloved, the alpha who learned humility, and the pup who knew when no one else would listen. Trust your wolf. Honor your instincts. Listen to the voices that seem smallest because sometimes they carry the loudest truth. And never ever force a pup to call someone mommy when their wolf is screaming that something is desperately, dangerously wrong. 'Cause wolves know. Pups see clearly. And instinct, that ancient wisdom that predates civilization and logic and human rationalization, is often the truest guide we have. Greta knew that at 6 years old. The Schwarzwald Pack learned it through tragedy and revelation. And now you know it too. The question is, will you trust your wolf when the moment comes? Will you listen to your instincts even when everyone else says you're wrong? Will you act on that ancient knowledge even when it contradicts what seems logical or convenient or socially acceptable? Because somewhere right now, there's a pup whose wolf is trying to tell them something important. There's a child whose instincts are screaming danger while the adults around them insist everything is fine. There's a small voice speaking truth that needs to be heard before tragedy strikes. Will you be the one who listens? Or will you be like Friedrich was before he learned his lesson, dismissing the warning until 3 seconds of violence forced the truth into undeniable reality? The story of the pup who knew isn't just history. It's a present-tense reminder, a living lesson, a call to honor the wolf in all of us that sees clearly when human eyes are blind. Trust the wolf. Always trust the wolf. Because 300 wolves missed what one 6-year-old saw clearly. And by the time they understood, a beloved Luna was dead and a murderer wore her crown. Don't let that happen in your pack. Don't dismiss the pup who says something smells wrong. Don't ignore the instinct that contradicts convenient explanations. Don't force bonds that the wolf rejects. Listen. Trust. Before those 3 seconds of violence become necessary to expose a truth that should have been seen months earlier. That's the real lesson Greta taught. Not just that she was right, but that she should have been believed sooner. That her nightmares and tantrums and desperate refusals were communication, not misbehavior. That her wolf knew what needed years of adult rationalization to accept. Trust your wolf. Trust the pups. Trust the instinct that kept your ancestors alive when survival required seeing threats that hid behind friendly faces. Because Adelheid wasn't the last predator to wear a mask of friendship. She wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. But she's the one who taught the Schwarzwald pack and countless others that children's wolves see clearly, that instinct matters, that 3 seconds of pure instinctive action can reveal what months of careful deception had hidden. 3 seconds that changed everything. 3 seconds that saved a pack. 3 seconds that became a legend reminding every wolf who hears it. Trust your instincts, honor your wolf, and never underestimate the wisdom of a pup who knows something you've forgotten. That's the power of the story. That's why it matters. That's why it's told and retold, refined and remembered, passed down through generations as both warning and blessing. And now you carry it too. The story of the pup who knew, the Luna who died beloved, the Alpha who learned humility, and the 3 seconds that exposed truth through instinct and action. Remember it. Honor it. Live it. Because your wolf knows things your human mind has forgotten, and sometimes the smallest voice speaks the loudest truth. Trust your wolf. Always.